Sit still for a second and notice what your body is already doing. You probably shifted your weight before I finished that sentence. Maybe there's a dull ache sitting low in your back, right at the belt line, the one you stopped calling pain a long time ago because it never fully leaves. You are not imagining it, you are not old, and you are absolutely not the only one. Right now, 619 million people on this planet are carrying the exact same ache. Not a virus, not an infection. Since 1990, the single biggest cause of disability on Earth has been your own lower back. The World Health Organization expects that number to reach 843 million by 2050. Here's the part that should bother you. Your dog does not have this problem. Your cat does not have this problem. A chimpanzee shares almost 99% of your DNA, spends all day hauling its full body weight through trees, and does not limp home at 40 to complain about a disc. We are the only large animal on this planet that routinely breaks in the middle. So what exactly went wrong? Because something did. And the answer is not the one you have been told your whole life. It is not age, it is not weakness, and it is not that evolution simply botched the job. Every layer of this gets stranger than the last, and the final one is sitting underneath you right now. Let's go. Let's start with the machine itself, because the shape of your spine is why any of this was possible. You have 33 vertebrae. 24 of them move, 5 are fused into the sacrum, and the last 4 are the leftover stump of a tail you will never use. Between the movable ones sit the discs, which are basically small pressurized cushions made of tough collagen wrapped around a gel core that is about 80% water. That water is why you are taller in the morning. Over a day of standing, the discs squeeze out fluid, and you lose about 1.5 centimeters of height. Overnight, they drink it back in. You are a slightly different size right now than you were at breakfast. For roughly 300 million years, that whole assembly was built to hang. Imagine a suspension bridge, load spread horizontally, weight carried on 4 points. Then, around 4 million years ago, our ancestors did something no other large mammal had committed to. They stood up, tipped the bridge on its end, and asked it to work as a tower. Towers have to be balanced, so the spine grew curves. Your lower back curves inward, your upper back curves outward, your neck curves in again, and the whole thing behaves like a spring. Push down on a straight column and it snaps at one point. Push down on a curved spring and the force distributes. It is genuinely clever engineering. It is also a compromise, and compromises have addresses. Yours are called L4 and L5, the 2 lowest vertebrae in your lower back. That is where the curve is sharpest, where the load is heaviest, and where about 95% of all disc herniations happen. 2 bones, almost every case. Your spine has a known weak point, and you have been standing on it since you were a toddler. A chimpanzee has 3 or 4 lumbar vertebrae, short and stiff, perfect for climbing. You have 5, long and mobile, because a stiff back cannot produce that inward curve. Every bit of flexibility you gained came out of the stability column, and the compromise is not the same for everybody. In 2007, anthropologist Catherine Whitcomb published a finding in Nature that still gets underrated. In men, the wedge-shaped vertebrae that create the lower curve are spread across 2 bones. In women, the same wedging is spread across 3, and the joints between them are reinforced. That extra bone is a load-balancing feature for pregnancy, when the center of mass shifts forward by several centimeters. Whitcomb then went looking for the same pattern in 2-million-year-old Australopithecus fossils. She found it. 2 different spinal designs, sorted by who carries the extra load, and the difference is older than our species. So the design is a compromise, fine. That is the version of the story you have heard, and it usually ends there, with a shrug and a line about the price of walking upright. Except, the fossil record refuses to cooperate with that ending. In 1908, 3 priests digging in a cave at La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France pulled out the most complete Neanderthal skeleton anyone had ever seen. The anatomist who reconstructed him gave the world its permanent cartoon of the caveman. Knees bent, head jutting forward, shoulders rolled, shuffling. That image ended up in every textbook, every museum, every joke about your posture at a computer. It was wrong. The man was somewhere around 40. He had lost most of his teeth years earlier, and his joints were worn out with arthritis. He was reconstructed off one arthritic individual, and for nearly 50 years, everybody assumed that was how an entire species walked. When the skeleton was re-examined in 1957, the verdict was blunt. He stood as straight as you do. We looked at one guy with a bad back and drew the whole family. Go back further and it gets more interesting. In 1984, on the west side of Lake Turkana in Kenya, a fossil hunting team found a nearly complete Homo erectus skeleton, 1.6 million years old, a young male, one of the best preserved ancient humans ever recovered. His spine shows abnormalities in the lower vertebrae. 1,600,000 years ago, on a lake shore in Kenya, a young hominin already had something wrong with his lower back. So back trouble is not modern. That is established, which raises the obvious problem, and it is the one I want you to sit with. If our spine has been this fragile for 1.6 million years, why are we the generation that turned it into the largest source of disability on the planet? Because here's the thing about that story. It is not that your spine is badly built. Your spine is built for a bill you have stopped paying. You were not designed to hold still. That is the whole video in one line, and everything before this was set up. Your discs have no blood supply. None. Not a single artery feeds the largest structures in your spine. They are nourished the way a sponge is rinsed, by pressure changing. Load them, unload them, load them again, and fluid pumps in carrying oxygen and pumps out carrying waste. Movement is not good for your discs. Movement is the only delivery system they have. Hold one position and you are not resting them. You are cutting off the supply line. So what did the bill actually look like? We can measure it because a handful of societies still pay it. Among the Hadza in Tanzania, women walk about 6 kilometers on an average day and men closer to 11 or 12. They squat to dig tubers, kneel to process food, climb for honey, and carry loads on the head. There is a Nature paper from 1986 showing that African women who carry loads that way can haul up to 20% of their body weight with no measurable increase in energy cost. The load rides through a stacked spine and straight into the legs. Free transport, as long as the column stays lined up. And here is the detail that ruins the tidy story that ancient people simply moved more. In 2020, David Reichland strapped accelerometers to Hadza adults and measured every minute of it. They are inactive about 9 to 10 hours a day, roughly the same as an office worker in Chicago. They rest constantly. They are not sprinting across the savannah in a nature documentary loop. The difference is not how much they rest, it is how. They rest in a deep squat or kneeling or sitting on the ground with legs out and no back support. Reichland measured the muscle activity and it stays switched on. He called it active rest. Same hours of stillness, completely different bill paid by the spine. And they do not have one way to sit, they have dozens. In 1955, an anthropologist went through the ethnographic records of 480 societies and mapped how people around the world actually hold themselves at rest. He cataloged more than 100 distinct habitual postures. The deep squat with heels flat, kneeling with the weight back, sitting cross-legged, sitting with one leg tucked and one knee up, which turns out to be one of the most widespread resting positions on the planet. Each one loads the spine at a different angle, and switching between them all day is, accidentally, a maintenance schedule. Count how many you use. For most people, the honest answer is 2. The chair, and the slightly worse version of the chair you slide into around hour 3. Which means the enemy was never rest. Our ancestors were world-class at doing nothing. Daniel Lieberman has spent years making this point, and it is worth repeating. The urge to sit down and skip the workout is not a character flaw. It is an energy-saving instinct that kept your ancestors alive. You are not lazy. You are efficient hardware running in a world that stopped charging you for it. So what took it away? The answer is simpler than you would like. A chair. For most of human history, a chair was not furniture, it was a statement. Egypt had them by 3000 BC, and they belonged to pharaohs and officials. Tutankhamun was buried with a gold one around 1323 BC. Everybody else squatted, knelt, or sat on the ground, which is exactly what most of the world still did well into the modern era. A chair meant you were important enough that your legs did not need to work. Then the chair went democratic, and it did it fast. Rows of desks arrived with mass schooling in the 1800s. Factory benches and clerical offices multiplied the hours. The Model T put a seat under the family in 1908. The office chair with a backrest and wheels showed up to make 8-hour stretches survivable. Then screens moved the last upright tasks down onto a desk. Then, in 2007, we invented a rectangle so interesting that people voluntarily bend their neck forward to look at it for hours. Now the price, in numbers, because this is your body we are talking about. A Swedish surgeon named Alf Nachemson did something in the 1960s that nobody would sign off on today. He put pressure sensors directly inside the discs of living volunteers and measured what different postures actually cost. Call standing upright 100%. Lying down drops to about 25. Sitting goes up to roughly 140. Sitting slumped forward with a load in your hands ran up past 250. The chair you are told to rest in loads your spine harder than standing does. Then there is your head. It weighs about 5 kilograms. Tilt it 15 degrees forward, and the load through your neck becomes 12 kilograms. 30 degrees, 18, 60 degrees, which is the angle almost everyone reading a phone actually uses, and it is 27 kilograms. That is a loaded suitcase hanging off the back of your skull, held up by muscles the width of a finger. The global average is close to 5 hours of phone time a day. 5 hours, 27 kilograms, every day, for years. Run that out to a year, and you get more than 1,800 hours with your neck at an angle it was never engineered to hold, which is roughly the same number of hours a full-time employee works. You have a second job. It pays nothing, and your neck does all of it. And before anyone decides the fix is to take the load off entirely, we have run that experiment. We ran it in orbit. Take gravity away, and the spine stretches. Astronauts gain up to 3% of their height on a long mission, which is around 5 centimeters, because the discs swell with nothing pressing on them. It sounds like a spa treatment. It is not. More than half of crew members report back pain in the first days of a flight. The deep, stabilizing muscles along the spine visibly waste away over the mission, and one NASA analysis put the risk of a herniated disc after returning at more than 4 times the normal rate. Remove the load completely, and the structure gets weaker, not healthier. Your spine does not want less. It wants variety. The bill for all of this is public. The United States alone spends about $134 billion a year on back and neck pain. That is more than it spends on any other health condition, more than diabetes, more than heart disease. We built an entire economy around a problem we manufactured with furniture. We traded a body that moved all day for a chair that holds it still, and most of us never even knew it was gone. Now some of you are thinking, hang on, ancient life was brutal. They hauled carcasses, they lifted stone, surely their backs were wrecked worse than ours. Fair question. And the answer comes from bones. We can read a spine. Compression damage leaves marks called Schmorl's nodes, where the disc gel pushes into the bone itself. And in 2015, an anthropologist named Kimberly Plomp compared human vertebrae with and without those marks against chimpanzee and orangutan spines. The result was not what anyone expected. The vertebrae with damage were shaped measurably closer to the chimpanzee pattern, slightly more ancestral, slightly less adapted to upright loading. Read that again because it is the strangest fact in this whole story. Some people are walking around with a spine that is, in its geometry, a little bit further back down the family tree. It was fine for climbing. It is not fine for standing on for 80 years. That is not damage you earned. That is a shape you inherited. And the bone record does show heavy labor leaving marks. Farming skeletons show more spinal wear than foraging skeletons, and the wear tracks the work. But wear on a bone is not the same thing as a life spent in pain, and that gap is where the modern story falls apart completely. Because in 2015, a review of imaging from 3,110 people with no back pain at all found something the medical world is still arguing about. 37% of pain-free 20-year-olds already had disc degeneration. At 50, it was 80%. At 80, 96%. Bulging discs showed up in 30% of 20-year-olds who felt nothing whatsoever. So the picture inside you does not predict the pain. Millions of people are walking around cheerful with the exact scan that got somebody else a surgery consult. Which brings us to the question worth asking. What if the ache is not a report of damage? What if it is a bill? What if your back is filing an invoice? The currency it was built to accept is movement, and it has not seen any since about 10 this morning. The evidence points that way, and it has for decades. Until the 1980s, the standard prescription for a bad back was a week of bed rest. In 1986, somebody finally ran the trial properly, comparing 2 days of rest against 7. The 7-day group did not recover better. They just lost more than twice as many working days. Rest was the treatment, and rest was making it worse. There is one more piece of hardware worth knowing about because you own it, and you have probably never met it. Wrapped around your abdomen is a flat sheet of muscle that works like a belt, and underneath your spine runs a chain of short muscles that bridge one vertebra to the next. Together, they are a built-in brace. In 1996, researchers put electrodes on volunteers and asked them to raise an arm. The belt muscle fired about 30 milliseconds before the shoulder muscle did. Your body braces the spine before it moves the limb, every single time, without asking you. Then they tested people with long-term back pain. The timing was late. The brace was still there, still working, just arriving after the load instead of before it. Which is the whole problem in miniature. Nothing is missing. The sequence has drifted because the sequence was tuned by a life that involved standing up roughly 200 times a day. Our ancestors, incidentally, had figured out a fair amount of this without a single study. The oldest written description of a spinal injury sits in the Edwin Smith Papyrus, an Egyptian medical text copied around 1600 BC from an original that is centuries older. It walks through cases with cold clinical precision, including a dislocated neck vertebra, and it does something remarkably honest for a document that old. For certain injuries, it simply writes that this is an ailment not to be treated. Ancient Egyptian surgeons had a category for knowing when to stop. Around 400 BC, Hippocrates built a wooden board with straps and a winch for stretching a patient's spine back into line. It was used for centuries. If your lower back hurts today, somebody would have tied you to a plank and turned a handle. Progress is real, and you should appreciate it. For the pain itself, there was willow bark, which contains salicin. Your body converts salicin into salicylic acid, which is the active ancestor of aspirin. Willow shows up as a remedy for pain and swelling in the Ebers Papyrus around 1550 BC and in Sumerian tablets before that. People were taking a rough draft of aspirin for their backs 3,500 years before anyone could explain why it worked. And then there is the frozen man. In 1991, hikers in the Alps found a 5,300-year-old body preserved in ice. He had 61 tattoos, and they are not decorative. They are short, parallel lines, clustered on the lower back, the knees, and the ankles. When his skeleton was scanned, the degenerative wear in his lumbar spine lined up with where the tattoos are. Somebody, 5,300 years ago, marked the exact spots on a man's back that hurt and treated them. The oldest known therapy for back pain in the human record is written on the skin of a man who had it, and they did not leave each other to manage it alone. In a cave at Shanidar in northern Iraq lies a Neanderthal man from around 45,000 years ago, whose skeleton is a catalog of trouble. His right arm was withered and useless from the elbow down. His right side had taken a serious hit to the head years before. He had healed fractures in several places and heavy wear in the joints that carried him. Every one of those injuries shows bone growth over it, which means the same thing every time.
He carried on for years afterwards.
A man with one working arm did not gather his own food, did not haul his own share, and did not keep up on a move. Somebody fed him, somebody waited. 45,000 years ago, a group with no medicine, no surgery, and no spare calories decided that a person who could not carry anything was still worth carrying. That is the part I keep coming back to. Ancient people were dealing with the same specific joint, in the same specific place, and reaching for the same basic answers we reach for today. Heat, plant chemistry, pressure on the sore spot, and each other. So where does that leave your back, right now, in a chair, reading this? Your spine is not a design failure. It is a 4-million-year-old suspension bridge that was tipped upright, rebuilt as a spring, given a reinforcement package tuned to whether you carry a pregnancy, and handed to you with a maintenance requirement written in movement. Not exercise, movement. Position changes, squatting instead of slumping, standing up before your body makes you, walking the 6 kilometers the Hadza walk without thinking about it. The ache is not your body failing. It is your body doing exactly what it was built to do, which is to notice when the bill has not been paid and send a polite reminder to the small of your back at 4 in the afternoon. You are the only animal that gets this particular ache, and you got it because you are the only animal that built something comfortable enough to sit in all day. So, that thing you did at the start of this video, the shift in your seat, the small adjustment you made without deciding to, that was 1.6 million years of instruction, still running, still trying to keep the fluid moving through a disc that has no other way to eat. Your back has been asking you for one thing this whole time. Not rest, not a better chair, just the next position. Now I want to know one thing from you. What is the longest you have gone today without changing position, honestly? And did you shift the second you read that? Tell me in the comments, and tell me what your back does at 4 in the afternoon.